6 hours ago, Katherine Sterling was the most powerful woman in the building. Now federal agents were reading her Miranda rights while 12 board members sat frozen around a mahogany table that cost more than most people earned in a year. The handcuffs were cold. That detail lodged itself somewhere in Kate's chest and stayed there, even as everything else began to blur. The reading of rights, the walk to the elevator, the lobby full of employees who stopped mid-stride to watch their CEO leave her own building in restraints. She kept her chin level. 15 years of building an image that said untouchable, and she refused to let it collapse during a lobby crossing, even now, but it did collapse, just not in the lobby. The morning had started the way every morning started for the past decade and a half. Kate arrived at Sterling Tech's 43rd floor at 6:45, before her assistant, before the cleaning crew finished their rounds, before the city outside had fully decided to wake up. She liked the building when it belonged only to her. The glass walls, the skyline beyond them, the name etched above the elevator bank in brushed steel. Sterling. Her father's name, yes, but her company. That distinction mattered more than she had ever admitted out loud. She stepped off the elevator and walked the length of the executive corridor without looking up from her phone. Somewhere near the end of the hall, the low hum of a buffer machine moved across tile. She stepped around it without breaking stride, the same way she stepped around anything that didn't require her attention. She never saw the man holding it. James Carter watched her go. He didn't say anything. He didn't expect her to acknowledge him. In 8 years of working the night shift at this building, no one on the 43rd floor ever had. He simply turned the buffer back toward the wall and kept moving. He had learned a long time ago that being invisible had its own particular set of advantages. He had a daughter to get home to. That was enough reason to keep his head down and finish the job. The board meeting was scheduled for 9. By 9:14 it was over. The FBI didn't knock. 2 agents came through the conference room doors while Kate was mid-sentence, presenting third-quarter projections to 12 people whose combined net worth could have bought a small country. She registered the movement at the edge of her vision and turned, more annoyed than alarmed, because in her experience, interruptions at this level were always logistical failures, never genuine emergencies. Then she saw the badges. The room went very still. Kate set down her presentation clicker on the table. She did it slowly, the way a person does when every instinct is telling them to remain composed and their hands are the only thing they can control. Katherine Sterling. The agent who spoke didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. You're under arrest for wire fraud, securities manipulation, and money laundering. 12 people sat around that table. Not one of them moved. She turned her head toward the only person in the room she had ever genuinely trusted. David Preston, her CFO, the man who had sat 3 chairs to her right in every major meeting for 6 years. She turned because she expected him to stand up and say something, to intervene, to at least look as confused as she felt. David was already standing. He straightened his jacket, looked directly at the agents, and his voice carried the weight of rehearsed certainty. I'm prepared to cooperate fully with the FBI. For the past 18 months, I've been documenting Ms. Sterling's fraudulent wire transfers totaling $47 million. The room tilted. Kate's vision narrowed to a single point. David's face, calm and resolved, no trace of hesitation. The man she had trusted with every financial decision for 6 years. The man who had dinner at her apartment twice a month. The man who sent her a bottle of Chateau Margaux every year on the anniversary of her father's death. The handcuffs came next. By 2 in the afternoon, every account bearing her name had been frozen. $47 million gone. Not stolen, sealed. Pending investigation. The distinction meant nothing to the automated systems that shut down her credit cards, locked her brokerage accounts, flagged her mortgage payment. By 4, she had been formally removed from Sterling Tech's board. The vote was 11-1. Only Emily Chen, the youngest board member, abstained. Everyone else raised their hands without hesitation. By 6, her face was on every news screen in Manhattan. CNN, Fox, MSNBC. The chyrons were brutal in their efficiency. Tech Queen's $47 million fraud scheme. Sterling CEO arrested. The fall of Katherine Sterling. Her apartment, the one on the 30th floor of a building in Tribeca that she had purchased outright for $8.5 million, was sealed pending investigation. Yellow tape across the door, federal notice taped to the frame. Her assistant stopped returning her calls. Her personal attorney, the one she kept on retainer for exactly this kind of crisis, told her to say nothing to anyone and then became unreachable himself. She stood on the sidewalk outside Sterling Tech at 7 in the evening, looking up at her name on the building. The wind off the Hudson was cold and tasted like rain. Around her, the city moved the way it always moved, indifferent, continuous, without any acknowledgement that anything significant had just occurred. She had managed crises before, hostile takeovers, regulatory audits, a product failure that had almost sunk the company's public offering in its first year. She had always known what to do. There had always been a next step, a lever to pull, a phone call that would shift the situation back in her favor. She stood on the sidewalk for a long time. She could not think of a single call to make. 14 attempts. She counted them later, sitting in a Motel 6 that charged $89 a night and smelled like disinfectant and old carpet. Her assistant, her college roommate, her attorney. The VP of operations who had worked under her for 9 years. A journalist she had helped with a story 3 years ago. Her accountant. Her real estate broker, her doctor. People she had known for years, people who owed her favors, people who had smiled at her across conference tables and charity galas and said they valued her friendship. Not one of them answered. The rain came around 8. Bryant Park was 3 blocks from the financial district, the kind of small urban green space that existed mostly as a throughway between destinations. At this hour, in this weather, it was empty. Kate sat on a bench near the south entrance, blazer soaked through, $1,200 Louboutin heels filling with water, and something that might have been shock settling into her bones like cold. She heard him before she saw him, the scrape of a drain cover being lifted, the particular sound of water clearing a blocked grate. A man in a city maintenance vest crouched at the edge of the path, working a clogged storm drain with practiced efficiency. He looked up when he noticed her. He didn't recognize her. She could tell immediately. No shift in expression, no double take, none of the recalibration she was accustomed to seeing in people who realized they were looking at someone important. He just looked at her the way a person looks at someone sitting in the rain for no obvious reason. With the low-level concern of someone who has seen enough of the world to know that it is sometimes unkind. He unzipped his outer vest and set it across her shoulders without asking. It was worn at the elbows and smelled like coffee and industrial soap. Kate looked at him. "What do you want?" James crouched back down and returned to the drain. "Nothing. You reminded me of my brother for a second." He worked the grate loose and set it aside. He used to sit in the rain too when things got bad. He said it without any particular weight, the way someone mentions a fact they've long since made peace with. Kate did not move to take the vest off. The rain came down harder. After a while, she said it out loud, mostly to see if saying it would make it feel more real. "I had everything this morning." James sat back on his heels and looked at her. His expression was calm in the way that had nothing to do with indifference. It was the calm of someone who had been through the fire and learned that panic was simply not useful. "What did you lose? Everything." "My company, my accounts, my name." James was quiet for a moment. Then he said something that made her angry, though she couldn't explain why. "That's not everything." He picked up the drain cover and set it back in place. "Those things, the company, the accounts, you think they were yours because they had your name on them. But you didn't lose yourself tonight. You just lost things you never really owned to begin with. Kate stiffened. You don't know what you're talking about. I built that company from nothing. Maybe. James didn't argue the point. He stood up and picked up his equipment bag. I built something too once. An algorithm that could detect patterns in financial data faster than anything on the market. Spent 4 years on it. Nights, weekends, everything. He slung the bag over his shoulder. Man named David Preston saw it and decided he wanted it. By the time I understood what was happening, I was the one in handcuffs. Spent 2 years in a federal facility while he turned my work into his career. Kate went still. James said David's name in the same way someone says the name of a storm that already passed. Not with bitterness exactly, but with the precision of someone who has had years to understand exactly what happened and why. David Preston? You know him? He was my CFO. She looked at the ground. He testified against me today. Something shifted in the air between them. James looked at her carefully, recalibrating. Kate stood up. The vest slid off her shoulders and she caught it, held it back out to him. Her voice, when she spoke again, had lost the hollow quality it had carried for the past several hours. Something harder had come back into it. I need to get into that building, and I need help. James took the vest from her. He didn't say yes or no. He said something else instead. What for? You want revenge or you want the truth? Kate opened her mouth and then closed it. It was, she realized, the first question anyone had asked her all day that she could not immediately answer. The rain kept falling. James waited. She didn't answer him that night. She went back to the Motel 6, bought a change of clothes from a Target 2 blocks away. Jeans, a gray sweatshirt, sneakers, things she hadn't worn since college, and sat on a bed that smelled faintly of bleach, staring at her phone. No new calls, no new messages, just the news alerts, still cycling through variations of the same story, her story, except it wasn't her story. It was David's story, carefully constructed over 18 months. And she had walked into it without seeing the framework until the walls were already closing. She thought about what James had asked her. Revenge or truth? The distinction felt academic. David had destroyed her. Destroyed. Whether she wanted to destroy him back or simply expose him seemed like a question of method, not motive. But the question lingered. She fell asleep sometime after 3 and woke at 5:30 to the sound of garbage trucks on the street below. For a moment she forgot where she was. Then she remembered, and the weight of it settled back into her chest like something solid and immovable. By 6:15 she was back at Bryant Park. James was already there, sitting on the same bench, eating a sandwich from a deli bag. He looked up when she approached, and if he was surprised to see her, he didn't show it. I need to get into that building. I need your help. She said it the same way she had said it the night before, but this time she didn't wait for him to ask why. David keeps a secondary ledger, a real one. Not the numbers that go to auditors or regulators, but the actual record of every transaction, every manipulation, every fraudulent transfer. I saw him once, last July, sliding a small external drive into a locked cabinet behind his desk. He didn't know I noticed. At the time, I didn't think much of it. She looked at James. If that drive still exists, it has everything. Not just what he did to me, what he did to you, what he's been doing for years. James set his sandwich down. Outside, the city was beginning its morning shift change. Delivery trucks, early commuters, pigeons reorganizing themselves along a ledge across the street. The building is locked down. Federal seal on the executive floors. The federal seal is on the business assets. The cleaning contract runs through a third-party facilities company. It's a separate vendor agreement, unless someone specifically suspended the overnight maintenance schedule. She looked at him. Did anyone call you last night? James thought about it. No, then the night crew still has access. James was quiet for a long time. long enough that Kate started to think he was going to say no, long enough that she started to prepare herself for that outcome, to figure out what came next if she had to do this alone. But he didn't say no. He said something else. "I'm not doing this for you, Ms. Sterling. I'm doing it for everyone like me that David destroyed." Kate nodded. "Call me Kate." The facilities depot was a low concrete building near the West Side Piers where James checked in for his shift. He signed Kate in under a supplemental worker form, paperwork that the overnight supervisor barely glanced at before stamping. She was a tired woman in her 50s who had been doing this job for years and had developed a talent for not asking questions that weren't her business. James handed Kate a uniform from his locker. Gray pants, gray shirt, the company logo on the chest, a cap with a brim that came down over her forehead. She held the shirt up and looked at it. Something moved across her face, not quite reluctance, not quite resignation. Something more complicated than either. James was already pulling on his vest. He didn't watch her. He had learned not to make a point out of moments that a person needed to get through on their own terms. When he turned around, she was dressed. She had tucked the shirt in, which no one actually did, and he almost said something about it before deciding it didn't matter. She pulled the cap lower and looked at him. "How do I look?" "Like someone who's never held a mop." He handed her one anyway. Sterling Tech at 11 at night was a different building than the one Kate had commanded for 15 years. The lobby guard, Mike, 55, a man James had exchanged small talk with for 8 years, waved the cleaning cart through with barely a glance. "Evening, James. Training someone new?" "Yeah, weekend shift coverage." Mike nodded and turned back to his monitor. They took the service elevator to the 43rd floor. The same route James had taken 5 nights a week for 8 years. The same cart. The same mop bucket with the squeaky wheel that he kept meaning to fix but never did because the squeak was useful. It announced his presence in a way that let people know he was coming without having to speak. The executive floor was dark except for the security lighting along the baseboards, long amber strips that turned everything sepia and made the place feel like a museum after closing. Kate's office had been cleared out, the furniture pushed to one wall and covered with plastic sheeting. She didn't look at it long. They moved past it toward David's corner suite at the end of the hall. James used his maintenance key on the secondary door, the one facilities used for overnight access that bypassed the executive keypad. It opened without a sound. David's office smelled like cedar and something metallic that Kate associated now with betrayal. She went directly to the cabinet behind the desk. It was locked with a 4-digit code that she had never been given. She tried the combination she'd once seen David's assistant use for the supply closet. People who held that much power rarely bothered with different codes for different locks. 7419. Nothing. Kate's hands were shaking now. She tried again, slower, making sure each number registered. 7419, still nothing. He changed it. James stepped closer, looking at the cabinet. Wait, David was an FBI intern, summer of 2001. He mentioned it constantly, used to say the FBI motto saved his life during a prison riot when he was interning at a federal facility. He looked at Kate. Try July 4th, 1776, Independence Day. He's that kind of patriot. Kate punched in the numbers. 7476. The cabinet clicked open on the third try. Inside, 3 external drives sat in a row, each one identical except for the labels. Kate remembered David's paranoia about technology, his insistence on Western digital black drives because they were designed for professionals, because they didn't fail the way consumer models did. She found the one she was looking for on the right side. The label was handwritten in David's precise block letters. DP-Ledger-2012-2024. She held it in her palm and felt the particular weight of something that could undo everything David Preston had built. Then the lights came on. David was standing in the doorway. He was in a suit, Tom Ford Navy, the kind that cost $4,000 and looked like it, which meant he had been waiting, which meant he had known. He looked at Kate the way a chess player looks at a piece that has moved exactly where he anticipated, with a satisfaction that had very little warmth in it. He looked at James last, and something shifted in his expression. Not surprise exactly, but a recalculation. "I didn't expect you to find him, Katherine. I have to admit that's impressive." He took a slow step into the room and clasped his hands behind his back. "Here's the situation. That drive doesn't prove what you think it proves. My legal team has spent 6 months sanitizing metadata, scrubbing timestamps, encrypting file structures. What it will do if you walk out of this building with it is give prosecutors enough thread to pull, enough to keep both of you tied up in litigation for 5 to 7 years. He looked at Kate. "Or I make a single phone call tonight. Your accounts unfreeze by morning. The charges are reclassified to a civil matter and quietly settled. You get your name back." Kate held the drive. "And James?" David's expression didn't change. "His situation is separate. He's on supervised release. Breaking into this building is a parole violation. That's 3 to 5 years federal prison, minimum." He took his phone out of his jacket pocket and held it up. "You have 60 seconds to decide." The room was quiet. Kate was aware of James standing to her left, aware that he had not moved, that he was not looking at her with any particular expression, not pleading, not accusing. He was just present, the way he had been present in the park, with that specific quality of stillness that belonged to someone who had long since stopped expecting the world to be fair and had simply decided to keep showing up anyway. She thought about his daughter. He had mentioned her only once, briefly in the park. Emma, 7 years old. The reason he worked nights instead of looking for something better. Kate set the drive on David's desk. David reached for it. Kate picked it back up. "I've done this before. Chosen my company over people. Chosen my name over truth." She looked at him steadily. "Not tonight, David. Not anymore." David's face darkened. "You're throwing away everything." "No. For the first time, I'm keeping what matters." David's hand moved to his phone. "Security. Code black. Floor 43. 2 intruders." James's hand closed around Kate's wrist. "Run." They ran. James knew this building the way only someone who has cleaned every corner of it for 8 years could. He knew that the main corridor bottlenecked at the elevator bank, that security would come up the back stairwell first, that the service hallway behind the executive kitchen led to a freight elevator that opened on the parking sublevel. He kicked the cleaning cart sideways as they ran, blocking the corridor behind them. Kate heard boots on tile, walkie-talkies crackling, voices coordinating. "This way." James pulled her into a narrow maintenance corridor she hadn't known existed. The walls were bare concrete, the lighting sparse. They climbed a metal ladder into an air shaft, crawled through ductwork that smelled like dust and machine oil, dropped down onto the 42nd floor through a ceiling panel that James removed with practiced efficiency. The kitchen was dark. Industrial appliances loomed in the shadows like sleeping animals. James led her to the walk-in freezer at the back, pulled the door open, guided her inside. The cold hit like a physical thing. -10 degrees. Kate's breath came out in clouds. Her wet clothes from earlier had never fully dried, and now the cold cut through them like they weren't there. James closed the door most of the way, leaving it open just enough to hear the hallway outside. "Stay quiet. I know every corner of this building. They don't." Kate's teeth were chattering. James moved closer, put his arm around her shoulders. Not intimate, purely functional, sharing body heat in a space that could kill them if they stayed too long. Footsteps approached. A flashlight beam swept past the freezer door's small window. Kate held her breath. The beam moved on. The footsteps receded. James waited another 30 seconds before opening the door. They stepped out into the kitchen, Kate's limbs stiff and aching from the cold. Freight elevator. Basement level. Move fast. They made it to the elevator without encountering anyone. The doors closed with a soft hydraulic hiss. The car descended. When the doors opened again, they were in a concrete corridor Kate had never seen before. Exposed pipes, utility boxes, the kind of infrastructure that existed in every building but that people like her never had reason to visit. James led her through a maze of hallways to a door marked server room, authorized access only. The door had a biometric scanner, fingerprint only. Kate's heart sank. I don't have access anymore. James looked at the panel, then at the wall beside it. Every server room has a manual override, fire code requirement. He pulled a screwdriver from his belt, tools he carried every shift, habits from a life before he became invisible, and removed the panel cover. Inside, a tangle of wires in different colors, red to yellow, bypasses the lock. Learned that during a fire drill 3 years ago. He connected the wires. The door's magnetic seal disengaged with a soft click. They were in. The server room was cold in a different way than the freezer. A controlled, humming cold maintained by machines that never slept. Rows of servers blinked in the darkness, tiny LEDs creating a constellation of red and green. Kate went to the nearest terminal and pulled out the hard drive. Her hands were still shaking, but not from the cold anymore. She plugged it in. The screen came to life. Voice authentication required. Please state passphrase. Kate stared at the prompt. It's keyed to David's voice profile. James moved closer to the screen. What does the passphrase sound like? I don't know. I never had access to this system. She looked at him. But you cleaned his office for 8 years? James went very still. Something moved behind his eyes. The particular expression of a person searching backward through a catalog of unremarkable moments looking for something specific. David had activated this system in front of him, multiple times. Late nights when James was buffing the floors, when David thought he was alone, when the cleaning man might as well have been furniture for all the attention David paid him. James closed his eyes, reaching for the memory. He said it like a grocery list, no emotion, just reciting. He opened his eyes and leaned toward the microphone. Fidelity, bravery, integrity. 7, 7, 4. The system processed for 3 seconds that felt like 3 hours. Authentication successful. Kate's fingers flew across the keyboard. The drive's contents appeared on screen. Folder after folder of spreadsheets, emails, transaction records going back 12 years. Everything. She opened a new window and started the upload sequence. Recipients: FBI Field Office, New York. Securities and Exchange Commission. Sarah Mitchell, Washington Post. David Brennan, New York Times. Andrea Lopez, Wall Street Journal. 14 recipients in total. Journalists, federal investigators, people who would know what to do with this information. Estimated upload time: 4 minutes, 30 seconds. James moved to the door, listening. Boots in the hallway, distant but getting closer. How much time? 3 minutes. The progress bar crawled across the screen. 15%, 23%, 31%. The footsteps were louder now. 50 meters, 40, 2 minutes left. James could see flashlight beams reflecting off the corridor walls. Kate's hands were clenched on the edge of the desk, knuckles white, watching the numbers climb. 62%, 70%, 1 minute. The flashlight beams were closer, 20 meters, voices shouting coordinates to each other. James looked at Kate, then back at the door. You want us? Come through me first. He stepped into the doorway, blocking it with his body. 87%, 91%. The guards appeared at the end of the corridor. 3 of them moving fast. 95%. Stop! Hands up! James didn't move. 98%. The guards were 10 feet away. 99%. Upload complete. Files sent successfully to 14 recipients. James raised his hands. Kate stepped away from the terminal, hands up as well. We're done running. The guards moved in, professional and efficient. Handcuffs for James first, then Kate. No unnecessary force, but no gentleness either. They had a job to do, and they did it. In a holding room 2 hours later, Kate sat across from a public defender named Thomas Wright, who looked like he had just graduated law school and was beginning to understand he was in over his head. She told him everything. The park, James, the hard drive, the upload. Wright's pen moved faster as she talked, his expression shifting from overwhelmed to focused. At 4:47 in the morning, the emails arrived. FBI Special Agent Williams opened his laptop at home, saw the subject line, clicked it open. His face went from skeptical to grim as he scrolled through the attachments. At 6:02, SEC analyst Martinez sat in his office with coffee going cold, highlighting fraud patterns in a spreadsheet that made his stomach turn. At 8:15, Sarah Mitchell at the Washington Post started typing. The Ledger, how CFO David Preston orchestrated decade-long fraud scheme. By 8:47, the SEC had frozen David Preston's accounts. $127 million plus 3 offshore entities that hadn't appeared in any public filing. At 11:15, FBI agents knocked on the door of a $4.2 million mansion in Greenwich, Connecticut. David Preston answered in a bathrobe, coffee in hand, still believing he had won. The agents showed him their badges. David Preston, you're under arrest. For the first time in 6 years, Kate saw him lose control. Saw him yell, saw him demand his lawyer, saw him become something smaller than the man who had stood in that office doorway hours earlier. In separate holding cells at the federal building, Kate and James couldn't see each other. But they didn't need to. They had already won. Kate sat on a metal bench and felt something she hadn't felt in 15 years. Not relief, not vindication. Something quieter than either. Something that felt like the beginning of understanding what her father had meant when he told her 3 days before he died that success without integrity was just a different kind of failure. She had built an empire. And in one night she had learned that the empire meant nothing compared to the choice she had made in David's office. Not revenge, truth. The difference, she understood now, was everything. The public defender left at 1:30 in the afternoon. Thomas Wright closed his briefcase with hands that trembled slightly, promised to file preliminary motions by end of business, and walked out of the holding room looking like a man who had just realized his career was about to get significantly more complicated. Kate sat alone for the next 45 minutes. No phone, no windows, just cinder block walls painted institutional beige and a metal table bolted to the floor. She had sat in rooms like this exactly once before in her life, when she was 19 and the police had called her to identify her father's belongings after his heart attack. That room had smelled like pine sol and photocopier ink. This one smelled the same. The door opened at 2:15. William Lawson entered the way he entered every room. Compact, precise, 62 years old and looking exactly the same as he had the first time Kate met him 11 years ago. He set his briefcase on the table with the kind of care that suggested expensive contents, sat down across from her and spoke before she could. The charges against you will be dropped within 72 hours. The evidence from the drive is significant. Combined with what the SEC is finding in David's financials, there's no prosecutorial path that keeps you as a defendant. Kate leaned back in her chair. What about James Carter? Lawson opened his briefcase and removed a folder. His movements had the economy of someone who had learned not to waste energy on gestures that didn't serve a purpose. Mr. Carter is the complication. He was on supervised release when the break-in occurred. That's a technical violation regardless of intent or outcome. He set a single page on the table in front of her. A draft statement already written with a blank line at the bottom for her signature. There is a straightforward resolution available. You provide a statement indicating that Mr. Carter acted under coercion, that you pressured him to assist under circumstances that left him without a reasonable alternative. Given your position and his, it's a credible narrative. It closes his exposure. The whole thing resolves cleanly. Kate looked at the page without picking it up. That's not what happened, I know that. Lawson's tone carried the particular patience of someone who had long ago made peace with the gap between legal narrative and factual truth. But it's the fastest resolution for both parties. You said it closes his exposure. What does it do to his record? The framing would require him to accept a version of events in which he was a passive participant. It doesn't clear his prior conviction. It simply avoids adding to it, so his record stays. Yes. And the technology David stole from him? Lawson's expression shifted slightly, the first indication that this conversation was going somewhere he hadn't anticipated. That's a civil matter. Separate proceeding. Kate pushed the draft statement back across the table. Then it doesn't resolve cleanly, not for both parties, just for me. Lawson looked at her for a long moment. He had known Kate for 11 years, had represented her through 3 acquisitions, 2 regulatory investigations, and 1 lawsuit from a former business partner who claimed she had stolen his ideas. He recognized the particular quality of her stillness, the one that meant she had already decided something and was now simply informing the room. What are you asking me to do? I'm asking you what the right option looks like, not the fastest one. Lawson picked up the draft statement, folded it once, and returned it to his briefcase. Then he picked up his legal pad and began to write. 8 blocks away, in a different holding facility, James sat across from a court-appointed attorney who had introduced herself as Lisa Chen, and then immediately corrected herself. Sorry, Lisa Martinez, still getting used to the name change. She was 32, looked tired in a way that suggested she'd been tired for years and carried a messenger bag that had seen better days. Mr. Carter, I'm going to be straight with you. The parole violation is straightforward. You entered a sealed building while on supervised release. That alone is sufficient for revocation. The U.S. Attorney's Office is prepared to recommend 3 years. 3 years. James said it without inflection, but his hands tightened on the edge of the table. Lisa pulled out a file. However, there are mitigating circumstances. Ms. Sterling's attorney has already reached out. They're preparing a statement on your behalf. If she testifies that you acted under duress. No. The word came out harder than James intended. Lisa looked up. Mr. Carter, I didn't act under duress. Nobody forced me to do anything. I made a choice. Lisa set down her pen. I understand that. But from a legal strategy perspective, I spent 2 years in prison for something I didn't do because a man lied about me in court. I'm not going to build my freedom on another lie, even if it's a lie that helps me. Lisa was quiet for a moment. Mr. Carter, I admire that. I do, but you have a daughter to think about. James looked at her directly. I know. That's exactly why I can't do it. Somewhere across the city, in a small apartment in Astoria that smelled like arroz con pollo and lavender air freshener, Emma Carter sat at Mrs. Rosa Martinez's kitchen table and colored inside the lines of a princess coloring book, with the kind of concentration that suggested she was trying very hard not to think about other things. Mrs. Martinez, where's my daddy? Rosa Martinez was 68 years old, had raised 4 children and helped raise 11 grandchildren, and had lived in the apartment next to James for 6 years. She knew how to talk to children about difficult things, but she also knew when honesty was the only kindness. He had to go help a friend, Mija, but he'll be back. Emma kept coloring, switching from purple to pink for the princess's dress. That's what they said last time. The people in uniforms, They said he'd be back, and then he wasn't for a really long time. Rosa put down the dish towel she'd been holding and sat down at the table. Your daddy loves you more than anything in the world. You know that, right? Emma nodded, but her hand holding the crayon had started to shake. Then he wouldn't leave you unless he had a really, really good reason. And he's going to come back. I promise. Emma looked up at her with 7-year-old eyes that had already learned not to fully trust promises from adults. Can we call him? Not right now, honey, but soon. Emma went back to coloring. Rosa went back to the kitchen and called the number James had given her for emergencies. It went to voicemail. She left a message, kept her voice steady, and then stood at the sink for 5 minutes trying to figure out how to explain to a 7-year-old that sometimes good people end up in bad situations through no fault of their own. Back at the federal building, Lawson was making calls. The first went to an assistant U.S. attorney named Patricia Ramos, 38, 10 years in the office, known for being tough but not unreasonable. Patricia, it's Bill Lawson. I'm calling about the Carter matter. I figured. What are you looking for? Recognition as a cooperating witness, not peripheral. Central. The evidence retrieval was only possible because of his insider access and specific knowledge. Without him, the Preston case doesn't exist. Patricia was quiet for a moment. Lawson could hear papers shuffling. He violated parole, Bill. I'm aware. I'm asking you to look at the bigger picture. David Preston has been running fraudulent schemes for over a decade. The SEC is finding offshore accounts we didn't even know existed. You're looking at RICO predicates. This is bigger than a parole violation. More silence. More papers. Send me a formal motion. I'll review it. I'll have it to you by end of business, Bill. I'm not making promises. I'm not asking for promises. I'm asking for fairness. Patricia hung up without saying goodbye, which Lawson took as a good sign. When prosecutors wanted to say no, they said it immediately. When they said they'd review something, it meant they were actually considering it. The second call went to his paralegal, Michael, who answered on the first ring. I need you to pull everything we have on the Preston case from 2012. Criminal case, civil filings, anything that touches James Carter's name. I need documentation showing the original charges were fabricated. How far back do I go? All the way, employment records, patent filings, everything. I want a timeline that shows Carter developed that algorithm before Preston even knew it existed. Michael was already typing. How fast do you need this? Yesterday. I'll have it by 6. Lawson ended the call and turned back to Kate. This is going to take time. Weeks, possibly months. The original conviction is a separate federal matter. We'd need to file for post-conviction relief, demonstrate that new evidence undermines the basis for the charges. I don't care how long it takes. I want him fully exonerated. Lawson made a note on his legal pad. That means reopening the 2012 case. It's resource-intensive. My retainer doesn't... Bill. Kate's voice was quiet but firm. Money is not a constraint. Time is not a constraint. I want this done right. Lawson nodded once. Then we do it right. 3 days later, Kate walked out of the federal building at 10 a.m. on a Tuesday morning. The charges against her had been dropped at 9:47. No press conference, no statement, just a one-page order from the U.S. Attorney's Office declining to prosecute based on insufficient evidence of criminal intent. She stood on the courthouse steps and looked out at a city that had kept moving while she sat in a holding cell. Taxis honked. Pedestrians rushed past. Street vendors sold coffee and bagels like nothing had changed. Her phone, returned to her that morning along with her other belongings, started buzzing the moment she turned it on. 14 voicemails, 27 text messages, 6 missed calls from her assistant who apparently remembered how to answer the phone now that Kate was no longer under indictment. She deleted all of it without listening. Instead, she called Lawson. Where are we with James? Lawson's voice came through with the sound of traffic in the background. He was already in motion, already working. Motion filed. Ramos is reviewing. I have a meeting with her Friday morning. What are his chances? Lawson was silent for a moment. The kind of silence that meant he was actually calculating, not just thinking about how to phrase bad news diplomatically. If we can get him recognized as a cooperating witness, his parole violation becomes secondary to his assistance in a major federal investigation. That's the first step. The harder step is the original conviction. How hard? We need to prove the 2012 charges were fabricated. That means finding evidence David planted, communication showing premeditation, anything that demonstrates Carter was deliberately framed. Kate started walking, no particular destination in mind. What do you need from me? Access to Sterling Tech's servers, email archives going back to 2012. Any communication between David and the DOJ during Carter's investigation. I don't have access anymore. Lawson's voice carried a hint of something that might have been a smile. You will by tomorrow. Emily Chen contacted me this morning. The board is meeting tonight. Emergency session. Kate stopped walking. Why? Because David Preston's arrest raises significant questions about the validity of the evidence he used against you, and because Emily has been doing some digging of her own. Turns out she's very good at forensic accounting. What did she find? We'll find out tonight. The Sterling Tech boardroom at 7 p.m. looked exactly the same as it had 10 days earlier, except that David Preston's chair sat empty and Emily Chen sat at the head of the table where Kate used to sit. Emily was 34, had been the youngest board member by 15 years when she was appointed, and had a Ph.D. in quantitative finance from MIT. She stood when Kate entered. Thank you for coming. Kate took a seat. Lawson sat beside her. The other 10 board members were already there, looking various shades of uncomfortable. Emily didn't waste time. I've spent the last week reviewing every financial transaction David Preston authorized in the 6 years he served as CFO. What I found is systematic fraud on a scale that makes the charges against Kate look like rounding errors. She pulled up a presentation on the screen behind her. David created 17 shell companies between 2018 and 2024. All of them appeared legitimate on paper. All of them funneled money out of Sterling Tech into offshore accounts he controlled. The total amount is still being calculated, but current estimates put it north of $200 million. One of the older board members, Gerald Thompson, 20 years on the board, leaned forward. How did we miss this? Because David was very good at his job, and because he had help. Emily clicked to the next slide. It showed an organizational chart with 5 names highlighted in red. These 5 employees in the finance department were actively assisting him. 2 of them have already been arrested. The other 3 are cooperating with federal investigators. She looked directly at Kate. Every piece of evidence David used against you was fabricated. The wire transfers, the offshore accounts, the documentation, all of it was his work, not yours. The U.S. Attorney's Office confirmed this morning that you were never a legitimate target. You were a convenient scapegoat. Kate felt something loosen in her chest, something that had been wound tight since the moment the FBI walked into that board meeting. Gerald spoke again. What happens now? Emily looked around the table. Now we vote on whether to reinstate Katherine Sterling to the board, and then we discuss what comes next. The vote was unanimous. Kate sat in her old seat, not at the head of the table. Emily kept that position, and listened as the board discussed restructuring, new oversight protocols, independent audits. When they were finished, Kate spoke for the first time. I'm not coming back as CEO. The room went quiet. I'll serve as board chair if you'll have me. Governance and strategy, but not operations, not anymore. Emily looked at her carefully. Why? Because I built this company by working 16-hour days and treating people like obstacles instead of human beings. I was good at it, but it made me into someone I'm not proud of. Kate took a breath. I want to build something different, not instead of Sterling tech, alongside it, a foundation for people like James Carter, people who get crushed by systems that don't see them. Gerald nodded slowly. That's good work, Katherine. There's one more thing. Kate looked around the table. I'm proposing we create a chief technology officer position. Someone who understands systems from the ground up. Someone who can see things we miss because we're too comfortable at the top. Emily leaned forward. Do you have someone in mind? I do. But first we need to get him out of prison. 4 days later, on a Saturday morning, Kate drove to Astoria. Mrs. Martinez's apartment building was a 3-story walk-up with a bodega on the ground floor and laundry hanging from fire escapes. Kate climbed to the second floor and knocked on apartment 2C. Rosa answered, took one look at Kate's face, and knew exactly who she was. You're the woman from the news. I'm Katherine Sterling. I'm a friend of James. Rosa didn't move from the doorway. He told me about you. Said you helped him. I'm trying to. Is Emma here? Rosa hesitated, then stepped aside. She's in the living room. Be gentle. She's been having nightmares. Emma Carter sat on a worn couch with a coloring book open on her lap. But she wasn't coloring. She was just staring at the page, a purple crayon loose in her hand. Kate crossed the room and knelt down in front of her, the way she'd seen adults do with children in movies. She had no children of her own, no nieces or nephews, no idea if she was doing this right. Hi, are you Emma? Emma looked at her with eyes that were too old for 7. Who are you? My name is Kate. I'm your daddy's friend. Emma's grip on the crayon tightened. Is my daddy in jail because of you? The question hit harder than Kate expected. She had prepared for many versions of this conversation in her head on the drive over, but somehow not this version, not this directness. Yes. Emma's eyes filled with tears, but she didn't cry. Kate recognized the effort it took to hold them back. She'd done the same thing at 19 at her father's funeral, determined not to break in front of people who expected her to be strong. I'm so sorry, Emma. Your daddy is the bravest man I know. He helped me because it was the right thing to do, and I promise you I'm going to bring him home. Emma's voice came out small and tight. That's what they all say, the social workers and the lawyers and everyone. They all say he's coming home and then he doesn't. Kate felt something crack open inside her chest, something that had been sealed shut for 15 years, since the day she decided that caring too much made you vulnerable and vulnerability was weakness. You're right not to trust promises from strangers. But I'm going to tell you something true, and you can decide if you believe me. Emma waited. Your daddy didn't do anything wrong. Not this time, and not the time before either. Bad things happened to him because of a bad man named David Preston. I'm working with a lawyer right now. His name is Mr. Lawson, and we're going to prove that your daddy was innocent. We're going to bring him home for real. Emma studied her face for a long moment. You're rich, right? I saw you on the TV. You have a big building with your name on it. I used to. I don't anymore. Can't you just buy him out with money? Kate felt the weight of the question settle over her. Some things money can't buy, sweetheart. Some things you have to fight for. And your daddy is worth fighting for. Emma looked down at her coloring book. He used to help me color, before. When I was really little, before the bad man took him away the first time. Kate reached out slowly and picked up the purple crayon. Can I help? Emma slid the book toward her. They colored in silence for a while, Kate filling in a princess's dress, Emma working on a castle in the background. Mrs. Martinez brought them juice boxes and then quietly retreated to the kitchen. After 20 minutes, Emma spoke again. Miss Kate? Yes? If you bring my daddy home, can he stay home? Like, forever? Or will the bad people take him again? Kate set down the crayon and looked at this child who had learned too young that the world was not safe, that adults made promises they couldn't keep, that love was something that could be taken away by men in uniforms with badges and forms to fill out. I can't promise you forever, Emma. Nobody can promise that. But I can promise you this. I won't stop fighting until your daddy is completely free, not just out of jail, free. No more parole, no more checking in with officers, no more worrying about getting sent back. Free to be your daddy without anyone having the power to take that away. Emma picked up a pink crayon and went back to her castle. Okay. That was all she said. But when Kate stood up to leave 30 minutes later, Emma hugged her, quick and fierce, the way children hug when they're trying not to hope too much, but can't help it. Kate drove back to her Motel 6 with Emma's coloring book on the passenger seat. Emma had insisted she take it, had carefully torn out the page they'd colored together and folded it twice. For when you miss home. Kate didn't have a home anymore. Her Tribeca apartment was still sealed. Her office at Sterling Tech belonged to someone else now. But she took the colored page and put it in her wallet next to her driver's license and the one photo she still had of her father. That night, she called Lawson. "Where are we?" He didn't ask what she meant. They'd been working together long enough that he understood the shorthand. Motion hearing is scheduled for Monday. Patricia Ramos is willing to listen, but she's not committing to anything. The challenge is that Carter's parole violation is clean. He did break in. There's no ambiguity there. What's our argument? That the violation occurred in the course of exposing a larger crime, that prosecuting him for it would create a perverse incentive structure where witnesses to major fraud are punished for coming forward. Will it work? Lawson was quiet. I've won cases with worse arguments, but I've also lost cases with better ones. Monday will tell us which way this goes. And the original conviction? That's a longer fight. Michael found some promising leads. Emails between David and a DOJ prosecutor from 2012 that suggest coordination. But we need more. We need someone who was there. Someone who saw what David did. Kate thought about it. What about the engineer who worked under James at the time? The one who testified at his trial? Marcus Webb? Yes. Worth a try. Michael's been trying to locate him. Last known address was in Philadelphia, but he moved in 2020. Keep trying. And Bill? Yes? I met Emma today. Lawson was quiet for a moment. How is she? Scared, trying not to show it. That sounds familiar. Kate knew he wasn't talking about Emma. Monday morning arrived with rain that felt personal. Kate sat in the back of a federal courtroom and watched Lawson make his argument to a judge who looked like she'd heard every possible variation of this argument before and hadn't been impressed by any of them. Patricia Ramos made the government's case with clinical efficiency. The law was clear. Parole violations carried specific consequences. Intent didn't matter. Outcome didn't matter. The violation itself was sufficient. The judge, Marilyn Howard, 56, appointed by Obama, known for being fair but unforgiving, listened without visible reaction. When both sides had finished, she looked down at her notes for what felt like an hour but was probably 30 seconds. I'm going to take this under advisement. I'll have a ruling by Friday. Court adjourned. Kate caught up with Lawson in the hallway. What does that mean? It means she's actually thinking about it. If she was going to deny the motion, she would have done it from the bench. Is that good? It's not bad. Kate wanted better than not bad, but she understood that this was how the law worked. Slowly, carefully, without regard for the fact that a 7-year-old girl was sleeping in someone else's apartment and having nightmares about losing her father forever. She spent the next 4 days in a kind of suspended animation. The Motel 6 manager had stopped charging her by the day and given her a weekly rate. She bought groceries from the bodega next door and taught herself to cook basic meals on the room's hot plate because eating out 3 times a day was starting to feel obscene when James was eating whatever they served in federal detention. On Wednesday, Emily called. The board approved your foundation proposal. $5 million in seed funding. More if you can show impact. Kate sat down on the edge of the bed. Thank you. Don't thank me. You earned it. Also, we'd like you to start as board chair next month, assuming you're interested. I am. Good, because we need you. David left holes everywhere and we're still finding them. Emily paused. How's the Carter situation? We'll know Friday. We'll know. I'm rooting for him. For what it's worth. It's worth a lot. Friday came. Kate sat in the same courtroom, same seat, watching Judge Howard take the bench at exactly 2 p.m. In the matter of United States versus James Carter, I've reviewed the motion for recognition as a cooperating witness. The government's concerns about parole violation are noted and valid. However, in light of Mr. Carter's instrumental role in exposing a fraudulent scheme that has thus far resulted in the seizure of over $200 million in criminal proceeds, I find that the interests of justice are better served by acknowledging his cooperation rather than punishing his technical violation. Kate felt Lawson's hand on her arm, a warning not to react yet. Therefore, I am granting the motion. Mr. Carter is hereby recognized as a cooperating witness in the investigation of David Preston. The parole violation will be noted on his record but will not result in additional incarceration. Mr. Carter will be released this afternoon pending resolution of his underlying supervised release status. The gavel came down. Kate turned to Lawson. What does that mean? It means he's getting out. Today. But the original conviction still stands. He's still on supervised release. We haven't won yet. We've just bought time to fight the bigger fight. Kate nodded. She understood. This was the first battle, not the war. But it was a battle they'd won. At 4:15 that afternoon, James Carter walked out of the Metropolitan Correctional Center wearing the same clothes he'd worn when he was arrested. Kate was waiting on the sidewalk with Lawson. James saw them and stopped. For a moment, he just stood there 20 feet away, like he wasn't sure this was real. Then Emma came running from Mrs. Martinez's car parked at the curb. Daddy! James dropped to his knees and caught her, held her like she was the only solid thing in a world that had spent too long proving it could collapse without warning. Kate watched from a distance, giving them space, giving them this moment that belonged to them alone. After a long time, James stood up with Emma's hand in his and walked over. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. We're not done. Lawson stepped forward. Mr. Carter, we need to talk about next steps. The original conviction. I know. I understand. James looked at Kate. But we've got time now. And I've got Emma. That's enough for today. He turned to his daughter. Let's go home. They left together, father and daughter, walking toward Mrs. Martinez's car. Kate stood on the sidewalk and watched them go. And for the first time since the morning the FBI walked into her board meeting, she felt something that might have been hope. Lawson closed his briefcase. You know the original conviction is going to be harder, right? Much harder. I know. Could take months, maybe a year. Kate looked at him. Then we'll take a year. Lawson nodded once. Monday morning, my office, 9 a.m. We start building the case. Kate watched James's car pull away from the curb and merge into traffic. Monday, 9 a.m. I'll be there. She walked back to her Motel 6 in the rain, pulled out the colored page Emma had given her, and put it on the nightstand where she could see it first thing in the morning. Some things money couldn't buy. Some things you had to fight for. And some things, some people, were worth whatever it took. Monday morning at 9 a.m., Kate walked into Lawson's office on the 14th floor of a building in Midtown that smelled like old carpet and expensive coffee. The receptionist waved her through without asking for ID. After 2 weeks of this, Kate had become a familiar face. Lawson's conference room had transformed into a war room. 3 paralegals occupied one end of the table, surrounded by file boxes labeled with dates going back to 2012. Michael, the paralegal Kate had spoken to on the phone but never met, looked up from a laptop covered in sticky notes. "We found Marcus Webb, Philadelphia. He's still there. Works as a data analyst for a pharmaceutical company." Kate pulled out a chair. "Will he talk to us?" Michael shrugged. "Only one way to find out." Lawson entered carrying 2 cups of coffee and set one in front of Kate. "I spoke with Patricia Ramos this morning. The U.S. Attorney's Office is willing to review new evidence regarding the 2012 conviction, but they're not going to just hand us a vacatur. We need to prove prosecutorial misconduct or demonstrate that the conviction was based on fabricated evidence." "What do we have so far?" Michael pulled up a spreadsheet on his laptop and turned it so everyone could see. Emails between David Preston and Assistant U.S. Attorney Kenneth Morrison. 47 exchanges between March and July of 2012. Morrison was the prosecutor on Carter's case. What do the emails say? Most of them are routine case coordination, but 3 of them reference evidence that doesn't appear in the trial record, evidence that supposedly showed Carter had knowledge of the offshore accounts. Kate leaned forward. Evidence that didn't exist, evidence that David created. "We found the metadata. The documents were generated on David's computer 3 days before he turned them over to Morrison, but they're backdated to look like they were created 6 months earlier." "Can we prove David created them?" Michael clicked to another screen. Morrison's office kept digital copies of everything they received. "The metadata is intact. It shows creation date, modification date, everything." David was sloppy. He didn't scrub the files properly. Lawson set down his coffee. "That's our smoking gun. If we can show Morrison knowingly used fabricated evidence, the entire conviction unravels. There's a problem." Everyone turned to look at the paralegal who'd spoken, a woman in her 30s named Jennifer, who'd been quiet until now. "Kenneth Morrison died in 2021. Heart attack. 53 years old. There's no way to question him about whether he knew the evidence was fabricated." The room went quiet. Kate broke the silence. "What about his files? His notes? Email exchanges with colleagues?" Jennifer shook her head. "Standard protocol is to destroy case files 7 years after conviction if there's no appeal pending. Carter didn't appeal. The files were destroyed in 2019. Lawson tapped his pen against his legal pad. "Then we go after David directly, get him on record about the fabrication, use it to impeach the original conviction. David has a lawyer. He's not going to talk to us. He will if we subpoena him." "Can we do that?" "Not for the criminal case. But for a civil proceeding, yes. We file a separate lawsuit on Carter's behalf. Civil rights violation, malicious prosecution. We depose David under oath. Anything he says can be used to support the motion to vacate." Kate looked around the table. "How long will this take?" Lawson's expression was carefully neutral. "Filing the civil case, getting it on the calendar, conducting discovery optimistically. 6 months before we get David in a deposition. Then another 3 to 6 months to use that testimony in the criminal motion." Kate did the math. A year. Minimum. She thought about Emma coloring at Mrs. Martinez's kitchen table, asking when her daddy would be free for real. What if we find Marcus Webb? What if he testifies that David coerced him? Would that speed things up? It would help. But Webb testified voluntarily at trial. Getting him to recant now means proving he was threatened or manipulated. That's a high bar. Then we clear it. Lawson studied her face for a moment. "Katherine, I need you to understand something. This kind of post-conviction relief has maybe a 30% success rate. Even with good evidence, the system is built to resist overturning convictions. Finality matters. The courts don't like to admit they got it wrong. Kate met his eyes. Then we make sure they can't ignore it. 2 days later, Kate sat in the back of a rental car outside a pharmaceutical company in Philadelphia, watching employees file out at 5 p.m. Michael sat in the driver's seat with a photo of Marcus Webb from his LinkedIn profile taped to the dashboard. That's him, blue jacket, carrying a laptop bag. Kate got out of the car. Marcus Webb was 42, thinner than his photo suggested, with glasses that kept sliding down his nose. He walked with his head down, earbuds in, the posture of someone who'd learned to make himself smaller. Kate intercepted him 20 feet from his car. "Mr. Webb?" He looked up, startled, pulled out one earbud. "Do I know you? My name is Katherine Sterling. I need to talk to you about James Carter." Marcus's face went pale. He took a step back. "I don't have anything to say about that. I'm not here to blame you. I'm here because I think you were put in an impossible position 12 years ago, and I think you've been carrying that weight ever since." Marcus looked around the parking lot like he was checking to see if anyone was watching. "You need to leave. David Preston is in federal custody right now, arrested for fraud. The same kind of fraud he framed James for. Whatever he told you back then, whatever he threatened you with, he can't touch you anymore." Marcus's hand tightened on his laptop bag. "You don't understand. It wasn't just threats. He had evidence. Real evidence. Against me." "What kind of evidence?" Marcus glanced around again, then lowered his voice. "I was going through a divorce. My ex-wife was trying to get full custody of our kids. David found out. He said if I didn't testify against James, he'd make sure my ex-wife's lawyer knew about some offshore accounts I'd used to hide assets during the settlement." "Did those accounts exist?" Marcus looked at the ground. "Yes, but I didn't set them up. David did. He set them up in my name and then told me about them after the fact. Said if I went to the authorities, I'd be the one who looked guilty." Kate felt anger settle into her chest like a stone. "So you testified? I had 2 kids, 7 and 9 years old. David said if I didn't cooperate, I'd lose them. What would you have done?" The question hung in the air between them. "I would have done exactly what you did, and I would have hated myself for it ever since." Marcus's eyes filled with tears. "I think about it every day. James was a good person. He didn't deserve what happened to him. Then help us fix it." Marcus wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. "How?" "Testify. Tell the truth about what David did. Help us get James's conviction overturned." Marcus shook his head. "My kids are 19 and 21 now. They're in college. If this comes out, if people know what I did, they'll know their father was trying to protect them. They'll know you were a victim too." Marcus looked at her for a long moment. "I need to think about it." Kate pulled out a business card and wrote Lawson's number on the back. "Take all the time you need. But James has a 7-year-old daughter who's waiting for her father to come home for real. Every day you wait is another day she spends being afraid." She handed him the card and walked back to the rental car. Michael pulled out of the parking lot. "Think he'll call?" Kate watched Marcus in the side mirror, standing in the parking lot with the card in his hand. "I think he's been waiting 12 years for someone to tell him it's okay to tell the truth." 3 weeks passed. Marcus didn't call. Kate spent the time working on her foundation. She'd rented office space in a building near Canal Street, 2 rooms with aging HVAC and a view of a brick wall, but the rent was reasonable and it was hers. She hired a lawyer who specialized in wrongful convictions, a former public defender named Rachel Kim who worked for less than she was worth because she believed in the mission more than the money. Together they started building a database, names, cases, people who'd been convicted based on questionable evidence or testimony from witnesses who later recanted. The numbers were staggering. Just in New York, over 200 cases in the past decade alone. Rachel sat across from Kate's desk with a list of potential clients. Most of these people can't afford representation. They've been in prison for years. Their families have given up. This is going to take more than $5 million. I know. Rachel looked at her carefully. Are you sure you want to do this? This isn't like running a tech company. There are no quarterly returns, no exit strategy, just years of grinding work for people who might never get justice, I'm sure. Why? Kate thought about James in that park offering his jacket to a stranger in the rain. About Emma coloring a picture for someone she barely knew because kindness was the only currency she understood. Because I spent 15 years building something that made me rich and miserable. I'd like to spend the next 15 building something that matters. Rachel smiled, the first genuine smile Kate had seen from her. Okay then, let's get to work. On a Tuesday evening in mid-November, Marcus Webb called. Kate was at her foundation office reviewing case files when her phone rang with a Pennsylvania area code. Ms. Sterling, it's Marcus Webb. Kate set down the file she'd been reading. Mr. Webb, thank you for calling. I talked to my kids, told them everything about David, about James, about what I did. What did they say? My daughter said I should have told the truth from the beginning. My son said it's never too late to do the right thing. Marcus's voice was thick. They're both right. I'll testify, whatever you need. Kate closed her eyes. Thank you. There's one condition. Name it. I want to apologize to James in person before any of this goes to court. Kate opened her eyes. I think that can be arranged. The meeting happened on a Saturday morning in early December in a coffee shop in Astoria that James had chosen because it was 2 blocks from his apartment and Emma could stay with Mrs. Martinez while he was gone. Kate arrived first. Marcus arrived 10 minutes later, looking like he hadn't slept. James arrived last, walking through the door with the kind of careful composure that suggested he'd been preparing for this moment since Kate called him 3 days ago. They sat at a corner table. Kate ordered coffee for all of them and then excused herself to a table near the window, close enough to intervene if needed, but far enough to give them privacy. Marcus spoke first. I don't expect you to forgive me. I just wanted to say to your face that I'm sorry. For what I did, for what it cost you. James was quiet for a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice was measured. David threatened your kids. Yes, then you did what any father would do. I can't fault you for that. Marcus looked up, surprise evident on his face. You should hate me. I spent 2 years hating you. Spent another 6 wondering what would make a person lie like that under oath. Now I know. And now I can't hate you anymore. Because if someone threatened Emma, I'd do worse than lie. Marcus's hands were shaking. Your daughter. How old? 7. Marcus nodded, understanding passing between them. My kids were 7 and 9. If I'd gone to prison, I would have missed everything. Their whole childhood. I couldn't. You don't have to explain, I get it. They sat in silence for a moment. James continued. What David did to both of us. He knew exactly what buttons to push. Knew how to make us hurt each other so he could benefit. That's not on you. That's on him. I'm going to testify. Tell them everything. About the offshore accounts he set up in my name. About the threats. All of it. James extended his hand across the table. Then we do this together. Marcus shook it, and something in his face eased. A tension he'd been carrying so long he'd forgotten it was there. Kate watched from her table near the window and thought about revenge versus truth. About how revenge would have meant making Marcus suffer for what he'd done. But truth meant understanding why he'd done it, and giving him a chance to help undo the damage. Truth was harder, but it built things that lasted. The civil lawsuit was filed on December 15th, Carter versus Preston. malicious prosecution, civil rights violations, intentional infliction of emotional distress. The damages claimed were $20 million, but Kate knew the money wasn't the point. The point was getting David on the record. David's attorney filed a motion to dismiss on December 23rd, argued that the statute of limitations had expired, that the claims were barred by res judicata, that Carter had failed to state a claim upon which relief could be granted. Lawson filed a 40-page opposition on January 3rd. On January 17th, the judge denied the motion to dismiss. Discovery could proceed. David's deposition was scheduled for March 21st. Kate spent the intervening weeks helping Rachel build the foundation's case pipeline. They took on their first client in February, a man named Robert Hayes who'd spent 14 years in prison for armed robbery based on a single eyewitness identification that contradicted physical evidence. Rachel filed a motion for DNA testing. The DA's office opposed it. The judge granted it anyway. In early March, the DNA results came back. Not a match. Robert Hayes was excluded as the perpetrator. He walked out of prison on March 10th, 62 years old, having lost his entire adult life to a mistake one witness made in a lineup 30 years ago. Kate was there when he walked out, watched him stop at the gates and just stand there, looking up at the ski like he'd forgotten what it looked like. Rachel stood beside her. This is what we do, over and over, as many times as it takes. Kate nodded. As many times as it takes. March 21st arrived with unseasonable warmth. David Preston's deposition took place in a conference room on the 32nd floor of a building in the financial district. David arrived with two attorneys wearing a suit that somehow still looked expensive despite the circumstances. Lawson conducted the deposition with surgical precision. Mr. Preston, did you create offshore accounts in Marcus Webb's name without his knowledge or consent? David's lead attorney leaned forward. My client invokes his Fifth Amendment right against self-incrimination. Noted. Mr. Preston, did you provide fabricated documents to the U.S. Attorney's Office during the investigation of James Carter in 2012? Fifth Amendment. Did you threaten Marcus Webb's custody of his children if he refused to testify against James Carter? Fifth Amendment. It went on for 4 hours. David invoked the Fifth Amendment 73 times. When it was over, Lawson packed his briefcase with an expression that might have been satisfaction. Kate waited until they were outside before asking. He didn't answer a single question. How does that help us? Because silence is an answer. We can use his invocation of the Fifth Amendment in the civil case to draw adverse inferences. And more importantly, we can attach the transcript to our motion to vacate Carter's conviction. Show the court that David refuses to deny fabricating evidence. Will it work? Lawson looked up at the building they'd just left. It's the best shot we have. The motion to vacate was filed on April 2nd, 78 pages, 17 exhibits. Affidavits from Marcus Webb, from forensic analysts who'd examined the metadata on David's fabricated documents, from 3 former employees of Sterling Tech who testified that David had a pattern of manipulating evidence to serve his interests. The hearing was scheduled for May 15th. James called Kate the night before. Emma wants to come tomorrow to the courthouse. Kate was in her foundation office reviewing notes for the 100th time. Are you sure that's a good idea if things don't go our way? She needs to see it, needs to understand that people are fighting for us, that the system isn't just something that takes her father away. Kate understood. Then bring her. I'll save you both seats. May 15th was clear and bright, the kind of spring day that made New York feel like a city designed for hope instead of survival. Kate arrived at the courthouse at 8:30. Even though the hearing wasn't until 10, she sat on a bench outside and watched people file past, lawyers with briefcases, defendants with public defenders, families with the exhausted look of people who'd been navigating this system too long. James arrived at 9:45 with Emma. The girl had dressed up, A blue dress with white flowers, her hair in careful braids. She held her father's hand like letting go might mean losing him forever. Kate stood. "You look beautiful, Emma." Emma managed a small smile. "Mrs. Martinez helped me. She said I should look nice for the judge. The judge will be very impressed." They walked into the courtroom together. Judge Marilyn Howard, the same judge who'd granted James's cooperating witness status, presided. She looked down at the parties from the bench with an expression that gave nothing away. Lawson made his argument first, laid out the evidence of fabrication, the timeline of David's manipulation, Marcus Webb's testimony about coercion. He spoke for 40 minutes without notes, building a case that felt less like a legal argument and more like a moral indictment. The assistant U.S. attorney who opposed the motion was a woman in her 40s named Jennifer Park. She argued that the evidence was circumstantial, that David's refusal to testify proved nothing, that the original conviction had been based on solid evidence and eyewitness testimony. Judge Howard listened without interruption. When both sides had finished, she looked at James for the first time. "Mr. Carter, please stand." James stood. Emma clutched Kate's hand. "The court has reviewed the extensive evidence submitted in support of your motion. The metadata analysis is compelling. Mr. Webb's affidavit is credible, and Mr. Preston's repeated invocation of the Fifth Amendment, while constitutionally protected, nevertheless speaks volumes in the context of this proceeding." Judge Howard paused. "This court takes wrongful convictions seriously. When an innocent person is imprisoned, it undermines the legitimacy of our entire justice system. Based on the evidence before me, I find that there is a substantial likelihood that you were convicted based on fabricated evidence and coerced testimony." Emma's hand tightened in Kate's. "Therefore, I am granting your motion to vacate the conviction. The judgment entered against you in 2016 is hereby set aside. All consequences flowing from that conviction, including your supervised release, are terminated effective immediately." The gavel came down. "You are a free man, Mr. Carter." The courtroom stayed quiet for 3 seconds that felt like 3 hours. Then Emma let go of Kate's hand and ran to her father. James caught her, lifted her up, buried his face in her hair. Kate watched them and felt something break open in her chest. Something that had been sealed since the morning she stood in the rain and decided that losing everything might be the first step toward finding what actually mattered. Lawson turned to her. "We won." Kate nodded, but she was still watching James and Emma. "Yes, we did." Outside the courthouse, reporters were waiting. News of the motion had leaked, and the story of a tech CEO fighting to exonerate a janitor had the kind of narrative symmetry that media loved. James declined to comment. Lawson gave a brief statement about justice delayed not being justice denied. Kate stood to the side and let them have their moment, but one reporter recognized her as, "Sterling, what's next for you?" Kate looked at the woman, young, ambitious, hungry for a quote that would make the evening news. "I'm going back to work. There are 200 other people in New York alone who are sitting in prison right now for crimes they didn't commit. We're going to find them, and we're going to bring them home." "What about Sterling Tech?" Kate smiled. "Sterling Tech is doing fine without me. Turns out I'm better at fixing broken systems than running companies." She walked away before they could ask anything else. 3 months later, Kate stood in a boardroom on the 43rd floor of Sterling Tech and watched Emily Chen conduct a meeting with the efficiency of someone who'd been born to run things. The meeting ended at 10. The board members filed out. Emily gestured for Kate to stay. "I have something for you." She pulled up a document on the screen at the head of the table. "The board voted this morning. We're creating a chief technology officer position. Someone who understands systems from the ground up. Someone who can see things we miss because we're too comfortable at the top." Kate felt a smile start. "Did you ask him?" "I wanted to ask you first. Make sure you approved." Emily, this is your company now. You don't need my approval. Emily shook her head. This will always be partly yours. Your father built the foundation. You built the structure. I'm just maintaining it. So I'm asking, do you think James Carter is the right choice? Kate thought about a man who'd spent 8 years being invisible, learning every corner of a building while the people inside it never saw him. About someone who understood that truth mattered more than revenge, that doing the right thing sometimes meant losing everything you had left. He's the only choice. Emily smiled. Good, because I already offered him the job. Kate laughed, real and surprised. And? He said he needed to ask his daughter first. Apparently she's concerned about whether the office has enough windows. She wants to be able to see the city when she visits. That sounds like Emma. Emily pulled up another document. There's one more thing. The board approved a settlement in the civil case. David Preston's assets have been seized. After restitution to Sterling Tech and other victims, there's approximately $12 million remaining. The board voted to award it to James as compensation for the theft of his intellectual property. Kate's eyes widened. Does he know? Not yet. Lawson is telling him this afternoon. Emily looked at Kate directly. None of this happens without you. You know that, right? Kate thought about standing on a sidewalk in the rain, about sitting in a holding cell, about Emma's colored picture in her wallet. I was just trying to do the right thing. That's exactly what I mean. On a Saturday morning in late September, Kate stood on the rooftop terrace of Sterling Tech's 45th floor and looked out at a city that had stopped feeling indifferent. The skyline still stretched forever. The river still caught the light, the traffic still reorganized itself along invisible patterns. But now, when she looked at it, she saw the people inside the buildings, the ones working night shifts, the ones holding families together with jobs that paid too little and demanded too much, the ones who got crushed by systems that never saw them. She heard footsteps behind her. James joined her at the railing, 2 coffee cups in hand. He'd started 3 weeks ago as CTO. The suit still looked slightly foreign on him, but he wore it with increasing comfort. Emma wants to know if she can come to work with me next Saturday. Something about a school project on technology. Kate took one of the coffee cups. What did you tell her? That she needs to clear it with Mrs. Martinez first, and that she has to promise not to reorganize my office. Again. They stood in comfortable silence for a moment. James spoke first. You know what's strange? I walked this hallway for 8 years. Never thought I'd walk it as anything other than the cleaning crew. Now I have engineers reporting to me. A team. An office with my name on the door. How does it feel? Surreal. But right. Like I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be. Kate sipped her coffee. I used to stand here and think I owned all this. Every building, every light, like it existed because of me. And now I know we don't build cities, we just learn how to live in them without taking more space than we need. James smiled. Emma asked me this morning if I was nervous about the new job. What did you say? I told her I'd been in this building before. She thought that was a weird answer. Kate laughed, genuine and unguarded. It's perfect. Below them, Manhattan moved with its usual inexhaustible motion, lights coming on in windows, traffic redistributing along avenues, the river catching morning sun in the distance. James set down his coffee cup. I never thanked you, not properly, for what you did. You thanked me in the courthouse. That was for Emma's benefit. This is for me. He turned to face her directly. You didn't have to help me. You'd already lost everything. Helping me meant risking the only thing you had left, the chance to clear your own name and walk away. But you chose to fight for someone you barely knew. That's not something I forget. Kate met his eyes. You helped me first. That night in the park, when I had nothing and nowhere to go. You gave me your jacket and told me I hadn't lost myself. You have no idea how much I needed to hear that. James was quiet for a moment. Maybe we helped each other. Maybe we did. They turned back to the city and Kate thought about the foundation she'd built, about the 11 people they'd freed from prison in the past 6 months, about the 43 cases they were working on right now, about Emma, who'd stopped having nightmares and started having friends over for sleepovers, about James, who'd taught his daughter that the system could be broken but it could also be fixed if enough people cared. Her phone buzzed. "Rachel Kim, we got the DNA results on the Miller case. Exclusion judge is signing the release order this afternoon." Kate closed her eyes. That's 12. 12 people freed in 7 months. Not enough. Not even close. But a start. James looked at her. Good news? Another exoneration. Andrew Miller. 22 years inside for a murder he didn't commit. James nodded slowly. You're doing good work. We're doing good work. You're on the Foundation's advisory board now, remember? In name only. You're the one putting in the hours. Kate smiled. I have the time. Turns out when you're not trying to run a billion-dollar company, there are plenty of hours in the day. Do you miss it? Running Sterling Tech? Kate thought about it honestly. Sometimes. I miss the feeling of building something, of seeing an idea become real. But I don't miss the person I was when I was doing it. That version of me wouldn't have stopped to help someone in the rain. She would have walked right past. And now? Now I stop. Every time. They finished their coffee in silence, watching the city wake up beneath them. Finally, James spoke. Emma wants you to come to dinner next week. She's insisting on cooking. Well, Mrs. Martinez will cook, but Emma will supervise. Kate felt warmth spread through her chest. I'd love that. Fair warning. She's planning to ask you about funding her invention. Something about a device that alerts you when your father is coming home so you can hide the cookies you weren't supposed to eat. Kate laughed. That's the best pitch I've heard all week. Tell her I'm in. James smiled, then glanced at his watch. I should get back. Team meeting at 11. We're redesigning the core algorithm. The one David stole, the one I'm taking back. Making it better. Making it something that can't be used to hurt people. Kate watched him walk back toward the elevator. This man who'd spent 8 years being invisible and now stood at the center of the company that had once employed him only to clean its floors. She stayed on the terrace for another 20 minutes, watching the city and thinking about her father. About what he'd told her 3 days before he died when she was 19 and thought she understood how the world worked. Success without integrity is just a different kind of failure, Katie. She'd spent 15 years building success, and one night in a park learning about integrity from a man who'd lost everything but never lost himself. Her phone buzzed again. Emily. Board meeting in 30, you coming? Kate typed back quickly. On my way. She rode the elevator down to 43, walked the corridor she'd commanded for so long, took her seat at the boardroom table where she'd once sat at the head. Emily called the meeting to order. They discussed quarterly projections, new product launches, hiring priorities. Kate listened and contributed, but she wasn't driving anymore. She was guiding, suggesting, letting other people build while she made sure they built well. The meeting ended at noon. Kate walked out with Emily. Lunch? Can't. Foundation meeting at 1. But dinner next week? I'm going to James's place. Emma's cooking. Emily smiled. That girl is going places. She's already there. She just doesn't know it yet. Kate left Sterling Tech at 12:30, walked to the subway, took the train to Canal Street. Her foundation office was in a building that would never have her name on it, doing work that would never make her rich again. But when she walked through the door and saw Rachel reviewing case files, when she saw the stack of letters from inmates asking for help, when she thought about the 12 people who were home with their families because someone had finally listened, she felt something she'd never felt in 15 years of running Sterling Tech. She felt like she was exactly where she belonged. That evening, Kate sat in her apartment, not the Tribeca high-rise that had been sealed and eventually sold to cover legal fees, but a modest two-bedroom in Brooklyn that cost a tenth as much and somehow felt more like home. She pulled out Emma's colored picture from her wallet, carefully unfolded it, and taped it to the refrigerator next to a photo of her father. Two people who'd taught her the same lesson in different ways. That the most powerful person in the room isn't always the one whose name is on the wall. It's the one who shows up when no one is watching. The one who does the right thing even when it costs everything. The one who understands that truth is harder than revenge, but it builds things that last. Kate made herself dinner, pasta, nothing fancy, and ate it at the small table by the window, looking out at Brooklyn streets instead of Manhattan's skyline. Her phone buzzed one more time, a text from James. Emma says you have to bring dessert next week, something chocolate, non-negotiable. Kate smiled and typed back, "Tell her I'll bring the best chocolate cake Brooklyn has to offer." 3 dots appeared then. "She says that's acceptable. See you Tuesday at 7. Kate set down her phone and finished her dinner. Outside, the city kept moving. Inside, Kate Sterling, former CEO, current foundation director, future dinner guest, sat in her small apartment and felt richer than she'd ever been when she had $47 million in the bank. Because she'd learned something that money could never buy. That some things you can't own. You can only earn them, every single day, by showing up, by doing the work, by choosing truth over convenience and people over profit. And that was enough. It was more than enough. It was everything.